Welcome back to the 97th online episode of Peacetime, hosted every Sunday morning by Peace Point with myself, Phra Nicholas Thanissaro, coming to you today from the DIMC in Azusa, California. In the previous session, we looked at the Dīghajanu Sutta, and today we continue to look at the remaining suttas from the Buddhist scriptures that deal with Buddhist economics, namely the Āḻavaka Sutta, the Kāmabhogī Sutta, and revisiting a small part of the Kūṭadanta Sutta. I estimate today's session will run to about an hour with a 30-minute break halfway for some meditation. So last session we studied the economic principles applicable to happiness in this lifetime and the next. Today we will continue by looking at the long-term goals of such practice, because without such goals clearly in mind, it is unlikely that anyone will have the patience to put the principles into practice. Buddhist microeconomics, like aim in life more generally, is designed to work on three levels, which represent the true value of any economic activity. The worldly, spiritual, and transcendental levels, where the worldly level refers to material comfort and economic security, the spiritual level refers to mental well-being, and the transcendental would refer to ultimate liberation from the cycle of rebirth. In our previous session on the Dīghajanu Sutta, we already familiarized ourselves with the first two levels, namely happiness in the present lifetime and the hereafter. But just to revise what we've already learned, I will summarize briefly before moving on to the transcendental level in microeconomics. So as we saw in the previous session, microeconomics on the worldly level corresponds to the first question from the Dīghajanu Sutta concerning happiness in the present lifetime. This is sometimes represented in Thailand in the form of a traditional yantra or patterned cloth. So, for this level of aim in life, where one's economics are focused on immediate material convenience in order to avoid hardship, where the microeconomic principles have been nicknamed the four chambers of the millionaire's heart, and summarized phonetically by the acronym Āḷavaka, namely U refers to Uttana Sampata or diligent acquisition, A refers to Āraka Sampata or conservation, Ka refers to Kalyana Mittata or having good friends, and Sa refers to Sammajivita or living within one's means. The aim on this level, which we must not lose sight of, is standing on our own 2 feet instead of being a burden on society, achieving by scrupulous means a moderate degree of material comfort and economic security for oneself and one's family. The most important guiding principle in accumulating wealth for oneself is to avoid the bad karma of taking advantage of others. The principle of microeconomics corresponding to the Dīghajanu Sutta's advice concerning happiness in the hereafter, or the aim in life on the spiritual level, has been summarized in our yantra by the acronym Sa Si Ja Ha, namely where Sa refers to Sattha or faith, where Si refers to Sila or self-discipline, where Cha refers to Chaka or self-sacrifice, and where Pa refers to Panya or wisdom. In addition, practitioners need to expand the mind. This means specifically expanding our capacity to give and share with others without limits, because most people find their capacity for unconditional love and giving applies only to their close family. Others find even being kind to their own family too demanding. There are teachers who hold back knowledge from all but their favorite students. Others' generosity is held back from communities outside their own. It all boils down to compassion that has its limits. If we find our own capacity for kindness has its limits, we can at least practice expanding our mind through spreading loving kindness regularly at the end of each meditation to prevent us from objectifying those outside our immediate family. Microeconomics at the transcendental or ultimate level is not dealt with in the Dīghajanu Sutta, which deals only with happiness in the present lifetime and the hereafter. The question remains of which sort of economics one needs if one wants to reach beyond the heaven realms to nirvana and reach a complete end of all defilements. Fortunately, elsewhere in the scriptures, the Buddha did give guidance on how not to lose sight of ultimate concerns in our microeconomic principles. For Buddhist microeconomics on the transcendental or ultimate level, what becomes important is economic values and practices which lead to the uprooting of sense pleasure from the mind, where sense pleasure means indulgence or delight in things that are attractive to the senses. Sensuality can be broken down into two components, sense-side sensuality and object-side sensuality, where sense-side sensuality, or in Pali kilesa-gama, is the emotion of desiring something which is a defilement existing in the mind and which forces the mind to grasp after things and desire for things without end. The defilements of grasping or raga and greed or lobha are two examples of the form it takes. As for object-side sensuality, or as it's known in Pali, kāmavatu, this would refer to physical objects that are attracted to us, images, sounds, textures, smells, and tastes which attract the corresponding sense. An attractive image may be a beautiful flower or a sparkling diamond. An attractive sound might be that of pleasant music or a pleasant voice, birdsong, or the sound of a waterfall in nature. A pleasant smell might be the scent of perfume or the aroma of food. A pleasant taste might mean anything we find tasty, whether it be sweet or sour, salty or oily, which one prefers. Something pleasant to the touch might be anything which, when it comes into physical contact with one's body, is soft or pleasant. Sense objects have sometimes been compared to an unignited matchhead. The mental components of desire are like the striker on the matchbox. Only when sensual objects and their mental components come into contact with one another do we run the risk of being set on fire. In any case, the Buddha did not say that sensually tempting things of the world are the reason for greed. They are only part of the story. The sensual grasping comes with the addition of unfettered desire coming from the mind. Without the grasping in the human mind, the attractive things of the world never caused any harm to anyone. So once we've established that sensual grasping can be controlled by the mind, the wise do their best to eradicate all trace of sensual grasping from the mind. Practically speaking, to eradicate grasping from the mind, one must follow the advice the Buddha gave to Bahiyadaruchiriya in the Dhammapada commentary that when you see an object, just go through the motions of seeing it. When you hear a sound, just go through the motions of hearing it. When you smell or taste or touch something, just go through the motions of smelling, tasting, or touching it. And when you think of anything, just go through the motions of cognizing it. By doing this, our mind will always manage to dodge the hooks of object-side sensuality. By not being entranced by a perception, the sense-side sensuality has no chance to flare up. The opposite would be the case if one becomes elated by the pleasing things one senses, becoming entranced thereby and allowing the emotion of grasping to hijack the ethical discretion of your mind. So what is the big deal about sensuality? It follows that those whose mind is inundated by craving for sensual pleasures will soon have reasons to take advantage of the weaknesses of themselves or others, or both. For those whose mind is overrun with grasping, exploitation of others' weaknesses is the next big temptation. However, if our mind is free of sensual grasping, there will be no selfish intentions to generate harmful speech or actions for us. This is the reason why the Buddha taught that we should cut down the forest of sensuality in the mind. Whether it be a large or small forest, you should make sure none remains. Verily, the Buddha said that sense-side sensuality is as a forest and object-side sensuality is like the trees. When everyone is overrun with the defilements of greed the whole of the time, it causes people to be endlessly obsessed with happiness derived from sensual objects, which is why the Buddha referred to such people as consumers of sense pleasure, or in Pali language, Kāmabhogī. In practice, this enslaves people to their senses and the financial acquisition, attempting to fulfill an unsatiable appetite. In this connection, the Buddha taught something called the Kāmabhogī Sutta to his leading male supporter called Anathapindika. Anathapindika was the Savatthi-based banker who was the sponsor for the building of Buddhism's first temple at the Jetavana Grove, but he was renowned even more for his wisdom. The classification given in the Kāmabhogī Sutta offers a very complete model of how development of the mind can fit with economic progress. By teaching the Kāmabhogī Sutta to Anathapindika, it was as if the Buddha intended to congratulate Anathapindika for managing to administer his wealth in a way that would lead to a transcendental level of aim in life. So the categorization of the Kāmabhogī Sutta tells us about the 10 categories of supposedly wealthy people, insofar as they deserve praise or blame. First group of consumers of sense pleasure who acquire money by unscrupulous means. So they acquire wealth by wrong livelihood, and having acquired it, derive no enjoyment from it, nor do they share it for the benefit of others or donate it for a meritorious cause. Such an attitude to wealth cannot be said to be smart, since their wealth only burdens them with worse demerit. The second group of consumers of sense pleasure also acquires money by unscrupulous means, but at least they derive some enjoyment from it. Nonetheless, they don't share it for the benefit of others, nor do they donate it for meritorious causes. Such an attitude to wealth is also not considered smart in the acquisition and is not particularly smart in the spending. Especially in the conservation of wealth, it is definitely not smart. The third group of consumers of sense pleasure is those who acquire money by unscrupulous means, but who derive enjoyment from their wealth, share their wealth with others, and donate it for meritorious causes as well. The fourth group of consumers of sense pleasure is those who acquire wealth by a mixture of scrupulous and unscrupulous means. Wealth in this case might be acquired partly honestly by a salary, but the rest might come from kickbacks. So it consists of incomes from both right and wrong livelihood. This fourth group derives no enjoyment from their wealth, doesn't share their wealth with others, and doesn't donate it for meritorious causes. Such an attitude to wealth is negligibly smart in the acquisition stage and is definitely not smart in the spending and the saving. The fifth group of consumers of sense pleasure is those who acquire wealth by a mixture of scrupulous and unscrupulous means, who derive enjoyment from it, but fail to share it for the benefit of others or to donate it for meritorious causes. Such an attitude to wealth may or may not be very smart in the acquisition or saving, but it is reasonably smart in the spending stage. The sixth group of consumers of sense pleasure is those who acquire wealth by a mixture of scrupulous and unscrupulous means, who can derive enjoyment from it and share it for the benefit of others, and also donate it for meritorious causes. Such an attitude to wealth may or may not be smart in the acquisition, but is smart in the way it is spent or saved. The seventh group of consumers of sense pleasure is those who acquire money solely by scrupulous means, in other words, only by right livelihood, but who derive no enjoyment from their wealth and neither share their wealth for the benefit of others, nor donate it for meritorious causes. Such an attitude to wealth can be considered smart in its acquisition, but not smart in the spending or saving stages. The eighth group of consumers of sense pleasure is those who acquire money solely by scrupulous means, who derive enjoyment from their wealth, but do not share their wealth for the benefit of others, nor donate it for meritorious causes. Such an attitude to wealth can be considered smart in the acquisition and usage, but not smart in the saving stage. The ninth group of consumers of sense pleasure is those who acquire money solely by scrupulous means, who derive enjoyment from their wealth and also do share their wealth for the benefit of others and donate it for meritorious causes. However, in spite of all their good actions, the people of these categories remain blind to the harm of sense pleasure and lack caution concerning sense pleasure. Such an attitude to wealth can be considered smart in acquisition and usage and saving, but because they lack insight into the harm of sense pleasure, they lack the power to liberate themselves from the clutches of the defilements of sense pleasure, mostly because they haven't had the chance to associate closely with wise teachers who can alert them to this. The 10th and last group of consumers of sense pleasure is the rare category of those who acquire money slowly by scrupulous means, who derive pleasure from their wealth, who share their wealth for others and donate it to meritorious causes. In addition, those of this category are no longer blind to the harm of sense pleasure. Therefore, they have the wisdom to want to escape from the cycle of existence, and this wisdom will allow them to renounce attachment to the use of the wealth. Such an attitude to wealth can be considered smart in the acquisition, the usage, and the saving, and furthermore allows them to overcome their defilements, ultimately to enter upon nirvana. If a person can acquire their wealth solely by scrupulous means, and if they can manage to derive pleasure from that wealth, while at the same time sharing their wealth for others and donating it for meritorious work, and having the insight to see the harm of sense desire and the importance of extricating themselves from it, this is the ultimate in the enlightened attitude to the consumption of wealth. So having now explained the basics of Buddhist microeconomics on the worldly, spiritual, and transcendental levels, let's take a break halfway and settle ourselves for 30 minutes of meditation, which today takes as its theme meditation for helping overcome grief and loss. If at this time you would like to find a comfortable sitting position for yourself as you listen to my guidance. So I'd like to invite everyone to close their eyes for a few moments to maximize and magnify the gift of positive emotion that we are able to share with the loved ones of ours who have passed away. So if you'd like to make yourself comfortable for some meditation practice now, closing your eyes very gently and breathing deeply to yourself, to relax and to slow down, bringing your body and mind back to a place of quietness within yourself. Meditation practice is mostly about working with our mind, for our mind to relax and recover focus. But we need to make sure our body is relaxed first of all. So initially we scan down through the whole of our body, relaxing each and every muscle as we go, starting at the top of our head, relaxing all the muscles of our forehead, relaxing our eyebrows and our eyelids. Even the way we close our eyes should be as light and gentle as possible. Relaxing our jaw and letting our shoulders drop to their natural height. Relaxing both arms, forearms, and then our hands and fingers. We can relax the whole of our torso, chest, trunk, and the muscles across our core, before relaxing both legs, all the way down to our feet and our toes, until the whole of our body feels as if it has become completely relaxed, almost as if it has melted away into the atmosphere around us, so that we can forget about our body for now and turn our attention inward to our mental state. Relaxing our state of mind relates to that feeling inside our body, the sense of warmth and well-being within. Relaxing the mind is mostly about letting go, especially as we take this opportunity to think about the loved ones who we've lost, it becomes hauntingly obvious how painful it can be if we are unable to let go of all the unreliable things in this present life of ours. If we are unable to let go, sometimes our mind can be overcome by grief or a sense of loss. It can make living our lives start to feel like a chore or an endless struggle to pursue elusive feelings of happiness. We can try to distract ourselves with new experiences, but what happens when the excitement wears off? We end up dependent on those external things for our happiness, and to some extent become trapped by them. Sometimes we never entirely recover from the loss of a loved one, and that's okay. The nature of grieving is we gradually learn to adapt to the gap that person or loved one has left behind in our life, so we don't let our mind wander to thoughts of the past or thoughts of the future, but we keep our mind firmly in the present moment. We keep our mind on the task in hand of relaxing the mind, of training and cultivating the mind in meditation, for which we've set aside these precious few moments. And we fill our mind, if we can, with thoughts of happiness and joy. If those feelings don't come naturally to us, we might cast our mind back to a time in our life when we did feel truly happy, copying and pasting those emotions as much as possible into the present moment. We make our mind spacious, radiant, light and refreshed. Spacious like the ocean, radiant like the morning sun, light as a feather, and refreshed like a flower bud in the early morning dew. So we fill our mind with happiness and joy, as if those tiny particles of happiness and joy completely filled our mind, leaving no space within our mind for any other sort of thought. And to make space for the maximum positivity of mind for today, we can imagine that inside ourselves is just an empty space, without any organs or tissues, without any muscles or bones. Inside the empty space of our body, we can imagine brightness. Perhaps we can even imagine the picture of the loved one who we've lost, imagining that picture within the brightness inside of ourselves. The image inside us may not be very clear. After all, it's seen with the mind's eye rather than our physical eyesight. Or we might imagine their names or their faces. If our mind wanders away onto other things, each time we realize, we just bring our awareness back again. If the picture disappears, we can just think of a new one. But we sustain that inner object by our feeling or by our mind's eye as continuously as we can, for as long as we can. If thoughts come up in our mind, we do our best to ignore them, to keep our mind clear of thought. But if there are too many thoughts in the mind for us to focus continuously on our inner brightness, then we might make use of the traditional mantra, hearing the sound of the words Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, just to keep our thoughts at bay. Hearing the sound of the words Samma Arahang for as long as we need to quieten down the thoughts in our mind, to complete silence and serenity within ourselves. And we continue to cultivate the focus of our mind in this way, lightly and gently for a few more moments now in silence. If we find our mind wanders away, each time we realize, we bring it gently back again to the meditation object at our center like before. If the inner object disappears, we can conjure up a new one. If it changes, then we follow it in its new form. And little by little our meditation will bring with it an underlying sense of peace, a feeling of fulfillment or unshakable contentment, no matter what emotion might be in play. The wiggle room meditation restores to our mind is not a quality dependent on superficial emotions. It can be experienced just as clearly in periods of sadness or anger as it can in times of excitement and laughter. Essentially, it's being okay with whatever thought you're experiencing or emotions you're feeling. That's why meditation feels so good, often even from the very first time we practice. The sense of contentment arising from meditation may not lead to emotional fireworks, but rather it leaves you with a sense of having touched upon that underlying sense of a place in life where you just know that everything's going to be okay. And the consequences of this can be life-changing. The time we spend meditating can change the way we feel about stress and the triggers in our lives, like the absence of a loved one. It may not make the situation less stressful, but it changes the way we respond to those stresses. Although we might experience a great sense of loss and sadness at times, we'll be able to treat it differently, almost like engaging with a place beneath those thoughts and feelings, where there is a sense of peace, of stillness and of calm. And having learned to access these deeper emotions through meditation, we find it is an aptitude that can never be taken away from us again. That no matter what else happens in our life, we'll always have this place within ourselves to which we can return. And any changes we hope for in our life will become that much more attainable. So we continue in this way just for a few more moments in silence until we come to time for some loving kindness meditation and also dedication of merit for those loved ones who have passed away. The way meditation can make a positive difference when coping with loss is to turn negative emotions around into something more positive. Out of a brutal sense of loss which we might feel, or even anger at someone's passing, we allow our feelings to morph perhaps into gratitude for the time we had the privilege to share, with a friendliness towards the loved ones who are no longer with us. Instead of letting grief paralyze us, we can slowly push back by starting to cultivate positive things in our lives, in honor of the memory of those loved ones, entertaining in our mind the possibility that the loved ones who we've lost have not disappeared, but are simply in a different place, but a place that is still within the reach of the positive energy that we are cultivating in their absence, as if they are able to pay witness from afar to the good things we are doing and be glad for us, absorbing some part of that positive energy for themselves. So we allow the positive energy to magnify and multiply from our center, emanating in ever-widening circles from our center. We continue to cultivate our merits in this way for particular loved ones of ours who have passed away, and for all beings everywhere, with good wishes for all of them, and the wish that they can pick up on all the positive energy we are sharing today for the last few moments of our meditation together in silence. Sappaputthānuppāvenam, sappathammanuppāvenam, sappasangkhānuppāvena sattha soti bhavantu te. So if you'd like to come to the end of your meditation for today, you can gradually open your eyes again. If you feel at all uncomfortable, then slowly try changing to a more comfortable position before gradually finishing your practice. So to come back gently to our topic for today of Buddhist economics, we have been looking at Buddhist microeconomics that correspond to 3 levels of aim in life: the worldly, spiritual, and transcendental levels. So in addition to the teachings we have already heard about, there are a few extra relevant axioms on Buddhist economics that come from a teaching in the Samyutta Nikaya called the Āḻavaka Sutta. This discourse consists of the answers given to the Buddha to 13 questions by a reformed giant or ogre called Āḻavaka. For our purposes in the analysis of Buddhist economics, the most important answers are those to the 1st, 5th, and 13th of Āḻavaka's questions. So Āḻavaka's first question to the Buddha was about which possession ought to be a person's greatest pride. The Buddha replied that being endowed with faith ought to be a person's greatest pride. The Buddha started with faith because, as mentioned before in the context of happiness in lives to come, Faith gives the initial brightness in the mind that allows a person to practice Dharma virtues until they can recognize their value through rational understanding. So, skipping to Āḷavaka's fifth question to the Buddha, he asked how a person can reach the other side, using the Pali word oka. The scriptural meaning of getting to the other side is synonymous with breaking free of the cycle of existence. The Buddha answered that people can get to the other side through faith, because faith in the authenticity of the Buddhist enlightenment gives them the perseverance to overcome the mental defilements in order to enter upon nirvana in the same way that the Buddha did. Lastly, Āḷavaka's 13th question to the Buddha was about how to avoid sorrow when leaving this world for the next. The Buddha taught that to avoid sorrow in worlds to come, one must have 4 virtues of the householder, or in Pali language, the gharāvāsa-dhamma, namely the character habits of truthfulness, training oneself without end, patience, and self-sacrifice. All these with faith as their precursor. In fact, this is a group of 4 virtues, which is another key factor in the understanding of Buddhist economics. An elaboration of these 4 virtues is a talk which I'll keep for another day, but suffice it to say that any householder with faith who avails themselves of these 4 virtues has found for themselves the most supreme and effective path in life. There is always pressure for educators like myself to produce memorable graphics to make their point, and even in ancient times, Thai Buddhist monks had a way of getting their followers to remember good economic practices. Their memorable graphics came in the form of a mandala to make it look a little bit more sacred, something which is called a yantra in Thai language. Sometimes it was written in ink on cloth to be hung up on the wall of a house. Later, finding that the yantra cloths were not very long-lasting, they engraved a pattern on plates of gold, silver, or other metals. Sometimes it was written on a door lintel. In other cases, it would be tattooed directly onto a person's skin. Later, with the wish for something portable, they made miniatures on small metal rolls and made necklaces out of them. In the old days, when monks went to give a house an inaugural blessing, they used to use such a diagram in indelible ink above the entrance. In olden days, the monk would not write the abbreviations in Thai, but in the Khom language of the old scriptures. So for the PowerPoint version, I have changed the characters to Romanized Pali initials for ease of comprehension. So we have already seen the Uākasa on the first level of economic principles for happiness in the present lifetime, or the 4 chambers of a millionaire's heart. This is what the economic mandala would look like on this first level. Around the yantra for happiness in the present lifetime, they added a second layer of economic abbreviations to denote practice on the level of a spiritual aim in life, as follows for happiness in the hereafter. So the sa, si, ja, pa syllables are added as a second layer. This mandala so far gives only practices for economic aims on the material and spiritual levels. If you want to go all the way and have an economic aim that will take you all the way to nirvana, you need to have a third level to correspond with the transcendental aim in life that we saw touched upon in the 10th category of the Kāmabhogī Sutta. The way to get that insight into the harm of sense pleasure is to practice the Noble Eightfold Path. Therefore, in the third layer, we see added to each of the 8 corners of the mandala the abbreviation for the path factors, where D refers to samadhi or right view, Sang refers to samma sankappa or right intention, Vaj refers to samma vaja or right speech, Ka refers to samma kammanta or right action, Aj refers to samma ajiva or right livelihood, Y refers to samma vayama or right effort, Sat refers to samma sati or right mindfulness, and Sang refers to samma samadhi or right concentration. These were skillful means of ancient Thai Buddhists who tried to integrate Buddhist teachings into everyday life on every level, especially so as not to get entangled by the rat race or materialism, but in order to focus instead on cultivating spiritual values. It would have been immediately apparent to Buddhists that it was important to avoid demerit by following a right livelihood in life. Quick profits from unscrupulous livelihood would lose their appeal. In conclusion, Buddhist microeconomics teaches economic moderation in life without abandoning Dhamma principles. All of what we have spoken about up to this point has concerned our personal economic habits, otherwise known as Buddhist microeconomics. However, the Buddha also gave economic guidelines applicable to the national or global level, something which we can perhaps call Buddhist macroeconomics. We have already seen such macroeconomic guidelines in our session IT10 or B060 on the Kūṭadanta Sutta. Just to recap though, the Buddha distinguished two levels of socio-economic groups in society, those at the top and those at the bottom. Those at the top are the politicians, senior civil servants, academics, major businessmen and bankers. Those at the grassroots include farmers, laborers, storekeepers, traders, clerks, and low-level civil servants. Both the groups above and below have one thing in common, that they feel poor. For the group at the bottom, it is not just a feeling of poverty, but they are actually poor because they live from hand to mouth, on the breadline, often struggling to make ends meet. No matter whether they are farmers, laborers, or clerical workers. Storekeepers and traders often have to put themselves in debt to get the stock they need to open a store. Clerks tend to be treated unjustly and have pitiable wages. All these groups are poor because of a real lack of wealth. As for those at the top, even if they have 100 million or 1,000 million, they still feel poor. But their poverty is different from those at the grassroots because the reason they feel poor is that their desires are insatiable. The majority of people in any country belong to the grassroots, usually 80 or 90%. That is usually the figure for people in any country who lack adequate wealth. As for those at the top, although they are not very numerous, their every move has some impact on the government, and might even cause a change of government in some cases. Those at the top are few, but they wield a lot of power. In the Kūṭadanta Sutta, the Buddha is asked what sort of sacrifice a monarch or ruler should make in order that they can be of real help to the citizens. In those days in India, sacrifices would usually entail the ritual killing of large numbers of live animals and the destruction of much plant life. In answer to this inquiry, the Buddha spoke of the perfect sacrifice performed in the days of yore by King Mahawititawi, who caused no damage to animal or plant life at any stage. Part of the sacrifice involved winning the economic cooperation of the four groups on the economic top of society, in order to help those in the lower economic rungs of society. The ruler would need to take heed of the four upper groups while helping those on the three lower levels in an appropriate economic way. When it comes to government investment, in the olden days, economic problems on a national scale would be solved by making concessions to those at the top. However, no matter how many concessions the government make to such figures, it is never going to be enough for them. Unfortunately, when such giants make a fuss, their voice is loud. Even though those at the grassroots are more numerous, their ability to protest is reduced because they are struggling even to keep their head above water. They cannot afford to take time off work to protest. Therefore, the government tends to protect its skin by giving concessions to those at the top. However, even if you were to give them 100 million, it would hardly be enough, because it's hardly enough for a good night out in Vegas. Therefore, helping those at the top just keeps their wealthy 1% quiet without satisfying them, and meanwhile the 99% continue to barely survive their precarious existence. If we turn to look at what advice the Buddha gave for government investment, we find that he supported allocation of funds to those at the grassroots, but with one important condition, that the recipients should be carefully selected. If handouts are given indiscriminately, then they will become reliant on handouts. Therefore, when giving concessions or help to the 99%, a ruler needs to assess which people are worthy recipients, using the criterion of 5 precepts and right livelihood. Worthy recipients should be those who are diligent and have attained success at a certain level. Such people should be selected to receive concessions. Helping such people would also be an example for others to follow. By helping in such a way, you will find that your investment doesn't immediately disappear, as it would if you were helping people at the top. In the present day, it might be necessary to have a sort of Shark Tank or microfinance committee to look after allocation of local budgets. Even this arrangement might not be fail-safe, however, because some local councils are less honest than others. This is why most advanced societies in the present day have developed the system of democracy in place of the Buddhist ideal system of government, where virtue alone and not the majority vote would be the deciding factor in the government. There would also need to be accountants to help to teach the recipients of the investment how to regulate their finances, because otherwise the money invested would lead to disproportionate failure in startups. As for the government role in cleaning up society, even on a national level, it is the roads to ruin which do most damage to a fair economy. If roads to ruin must continue to exist in a society, then they should be zone restricted and with clear opening hours so as not to encourage them to spread throughout society indiscriminately. Better still, however, is to try to phase out roads to ruin completely, but this would require cooperation and re-education on all levels. So this session has dealt with the problems of the world through the eyes of Buddhist economics. Usually monks don't get to interfere with such issues, but it is to be hoped that by clarifying Buddhist principles relating to economics on the 3 levels of aim in life, it will be easier to know where compromises can be made, what sort of wealth can be considered worthwhile, and what sorts undermine the fabric of society. Hopefully, it has become clearer that Buddhists look beyond money and so-called health of the economy to personal happiness on 3 levels of aim in life, things that are economically priceless. So today we've been looking at the second section of Buddhist economics. For my next live session online, which will, fingers crossed, be a week on Sunday morning, we'll look at the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, or the Buddha's first teaching. So for good measure, I'd like to remind viewers to keep the questions coming in about meditation or topics you've learned in the lecture to the email address that you can see spelled out in the slide, and I'll do my best to answer these on my next session. In the meantime, try to avoid recklessness or complacency, maintain a positive mood, speak only positive words, forgive others, extend good wishes to others, and meditate daily. Hopefully, as a result of today's session, you will be better able to earn, save, and deploy your hard-earned income in a way that brings the highest benefit for yourself and others on the material, spiritual, and transcendental levels. So that's all for today. Thanks for viewing. So long, folks, and stay safe.